Welcome back to Changes Throughout History, where we look at the details of history to discover their changes. Today, we are looking at the 1900s, specifically Mexico, China, and Russia. To talk with us about Mexico, we have Dr. Hiss Torre on the line. Take it away, Dr. Torre.
Gracias. Mexico in the 1900s were full of both change and continuity, and it had some of the bloodiest civil wars seen during this time. Before these wars, however, a man named Porfirio Diaz was using the military and police to repress dissent and limit people's freedoms. People did not like this, of course, and in the next election he lost to a landslide to Francisco Madero, a member of one of the wealthiest families in Mexico, who had denounced Diaz before. Diaz was then exiled to France, but shortly after, Madero was overthrown and executed during the 10 tragic days, which historians, like myself, used to describe the 10 days from the beginning of the coup against Madero to Madero's death. Madero had been betrayed by his own general Victoriano Huerta, who declared himself the military dictator. Two of Madero's amigos, Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata, social revolutionaries who championed peasant and indigenous communities, did not like this. They allied with liberals and defeated Huerta, but the peace did not last long. Two big political groups emerged. We had the Convencionistas, a group that included Villa and Zapata and wished for big economic and social reforms, including redistributing land from wealthy landowners to peasants and indigenous groups. And then we had the Constitucionalistas, a group led by Ernesto Carranza and Algarve Obregón, who wanted to establish a liberal democracy but were less willing to return the land to peasant and indigenous village. The two groups went to civil war, killing over 1 million civilians and soldiers. The Constitucionalists won and established the Mexican Constitution of 1917. This document enshrined legal and political rights and called for economic rights, social justice, land reform, nationalization of resources, and workers' rights. This document will not be followed, however, until Lázaro Cárdenas, Mexico's 44th president, used it to enact a broad set of social and economic reforms that transformed Mexican society, strengthened labor unions, nationalized Mexico's oil industry, and redistributed over 70,000 square miles of land. All in all, this led to many changes. The dictatorship ended, and since 1928, Mexican presidents have not been allowed to run for a second term. The 1917 Constitution also enshrined political and socio-economic rights and limited the power of the Catholic Church. The revolution brought universal education, labor rights, land reform, and the nationalization of some industries, and women gained some new rights after 1917. However, there were many changes as well. Women's important role in the revolutions was mostly ignored, and women did not win the right to vote until 1953. Wealthy landowners continued to control the economy, and the countryside still suffered. Most peasants also considered to experience poverty.
Thank you, Doctor. Now, to introduce us to Russia, we have Professor Ivan Ivanovich on the line.
Thanks for having me. In the early 1900s, Russia was fueled by corruption in the government and oppression of the lower classes for many years. All of this and more built up and eventually led to the Russian people to rebel against the Russian government in 1917. In 1917, when the rebellion started, World War I was raging in Europe. In Russia, World War I was causing a mass economic crisis, leaving a lot of Russians starving, jobless, and homeless. So now the mix of corruption in the government and economic crisis, oppression in the lower class, and Russia being in a war that they were losing, caused the people of Russia to finally rebel. The Bolshevik Party rose up to rebel against the Russian government and take over. They were able to overthrow the Tsar, which ended 500 years of autocratic rule in Russia. The Bolshevik Party, who led the revolution after they were victorious, changed into the Communist Party and pulled them out of the First World War. Russia was still dealing with the economic crisis that World War I caused, and many Russians were jobless, homeless, and foodless. So when the Bolshevik Party introduced a new form of government that gave everybody jobs and shared the wealth, the people really liked and supported it. The Communist Party did take power in Russia and created the Soviet Union, which held power for 68 years before their eventual downfall.
Thanks, Ivan. Now, before we close off this episode, we have a couple of words from our sponsors.
You're thinking to yourself, man, I'm not feeling very patriotic right now. Well, think no more. Flagco's 100 different kinds of flags have a 100% guarantee of unleashing the patriotism that is locked inside of you. If you use the code LondonIsAwesome for 30% off your first purchase.
Sick of hearing about these revolutions? Why don't you just go and do them themselves? Come on down to Charles Ammunition and stock yourself up. We got 9mm, half shells, 22s, practically everything. So come on down to Charles Ammunition today and start killing people for democracy.
Welcome back. To close out this episode, we have Mr. A.P. World to talk to us about China.
In the 18th century, the Qing Empire would suffer from the numerous challenges, and when they lost the war against Great Britain, that opened the treaty ports that they had multiple uses for. In 1905, they fell into a decline and tried to reform, and that was a last-ditch effort, and they created the examination system, which would limit how much political power the elites had. The courts also tried to decentralize power, and that increased the self-government. The Qing courts maintained a degree of China. In autumn of 1911, the right set of conditions turned out to be an uprising as the Wuchang nationalists and Yuan Shikai was a premier of China. He was a good leader because he recaptured areas from revolutionaries.
Thank you. Now that will conclude this episode. Tune in next week when we discover how changes in World War II occurred and what that means for your future.